Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about a Goofy movie from 1995. And this is a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. And this winner was selected by Jordan Bouchard. I know everyone really likes this movie a lot. And in fact, when I looked up anything about this movie, it kept telling me how this movie was underrated. Like a lot, like everything you look up about this movie talks about how it's underrated, despite that I see references to it like all the time. So I would argue that this film is actually, I wouldn't say it's overrated. I would just say it's rated at this point. It's not really worth saying it's underrated anymore, because we get it. Everyone likes it. It's fine. I was an actual close to teenager when this movie came out. It was not really a big deal at all. And when I think back on it, I kind of actually thought it felt like very behind the times. Goof Troop had sort of come and gone culturally about 2 years before this came out. And Powerline is doing New Jack Swing kind of music, and that's very much like early 90s. It's like 6 years ago almost to most people. If you look at Michael Jackson's Dangerous, got like overtaken by gangster rap and Nirvana's Nevermind and stuff. When that happened, that was like definitely identified as a big cultural shift, and so anything that was sort of like that was not cool. Or like this was the summer of TLC's Crazy Sexy Cool, or like between the time like this singer that does this, Tevin Campbell, who's the voice of Caroline in this, between the time he was initially famous and this movie, like Kurt Cobain had become famous and also killed himself. So that shows you the difference in terms of culture. Like seriously, I actually remember I didn't see this in theaters. I saw it at kind of like a lock-in type party, and I specifically remember when they put this on, a bunch of kids went in the woods and smoked weed and listened to Wu-Tang Clan albums instead. So I think that shows you, because it was not just 36 Chambers, but like all the offshoot albums. Not all of them. I didn't go. I watched a Goofy movie because I was not that cool in 96. This was the era of like, if you're going to do a father-son thing, you would have more like, why are you listening to gangster rap and Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube and Tupac and the Wu-Tang Clan and Big E, and like that was the popular music. That felt more of a shift than like the New Jack Swing stuff. Having this guy dressed like Hammer and stuff like that like was not cool in 96. Like we were not re-looking at it and appreciating it at that point. Like it hadn't been long enough, and most of that was when we were like, if you're around a teenager, was like when you were a little kid, so you weren't going to be interested in the same things you were into as a little kid when you're like starting, middle school, early adolescence. Just that stuff didn't in the 90s. That really wasn't cool. It's just kind of interesting. But the more interesting thing is, one of those guys who didn't watch a Goofy movie and then went in the woods and said, we're going to go listen to Wu-Tang, smoke weed. I went to his Facebook page, and what do I find? Because I remembered him, was a GIF about how 90s kids remember, and it was a Goofy movie and how much he likes Goofy movie now. Maybe he had seen it too many times in theaters and was just like, I don't care about this at this point. But it is very interesting that literally someone who like rejected this movie. However, that's kind of my background with this film, is that I liked Goof Troop. I saw it, it didn't make a big impression on me, and suddenly there's this big, huge cult around it. And anyone who was like kind of my age or around my age when this came out, it doesn't resonate as much with. And I think that's because it didn't feel like part of the times. But I think that's also what really works about this movie, because if you see anybody, any of these like father-son, or, these parents just don't understand things, they're far more about like, oh, I'm a business person who's too busy for my kids. And then the kids are like, I just want to hang out with you. And that's not what a Goofy movie does at all, which I think is what makes it so refreshing and what has actually made it stand out so much. The basic premise is that Max Goof, is it Max Goof? Let's just make sure. Max Goof, which would make his name Goofy Goof then? That's like a Mario type situation. Max Goof really likes this girl Roxanne. He does this huge, amazing U2 Zoo TV tour type of presentation to win over Roxanne and basically lip sync to Powerline. I don't know. But she's like falling in love with him, even though I think she liked him anyway. But this is basically him showing who he is. He likes power line and can do cool, visual effects stuff with Pauly Shore. So he gets in a lot of trouble because he did this at a school assembly when they were doing one on the last day of school. Terrible idea, guys. Never do that in a high school. That was sort of your fault, to be honest with you. But principal calls Goofy, and instead of suspending Max or doing much of anything, apparently, I really don't think he had any repercussions for interrupting what I assume was a terrible assembly. He just tells him that Max should be in prison, which I think is a little overhaul. I mean, like, performing something like that to a massive crowd, I don't think means you would get the electric chair, but, copyright law maybe was a lot different before, Nostalgia Critic cut his landmark case with fair use. But then Goofy is really hurt by this and feels like he needs to do something with his son, so he wants to take him on a road trip to a fishing trip on this lake where him and his father went, and they bonded quite well, and he feels like he could have those pleasant memories with his son. But his one Roxanne, is going to take her to a party where they can watch a pay-per-view concert, which that actually never happened. I don't really understand that part of it. It was like, that happened with like WrestleMania, but there was no artist who did pay-per-view concerts then that a teenager would want to see, but that's a whole other thing. But he's going to take her to this pay-per-view concert party, but Goofy's like, we're going on this road trip, so you can't do that. And instead of just saying, hey, I can't go, but I'll see you when I get back, he lies to her and tells her that he's going to be at the Powerline concert and he will wave to her during the concert while she's watching from pay-per-view, and then when he comes back, they'll go out and stuff. And she buys it for some reason, and they go off, and Max sort of messes up the map and kind of lies to his dad a lot to kind of get his own way. Rather than like trying to bond with his dad, he's like almost too cool for school. They sort of bond over the course of the road trip. One of the big things with this movie is Goofy. What I mean by that is Goofy as a dad is not like most dads, because in 90s movies, because they are like overworked, big corporate guys who just never have enough time for their kids. They barely know them. Goofy knows Max. Like, he knows he likes Powerline. He knows everything about him. In fact, that's pretty much all he has going for him in his life. It's actually kind of sad. He has a shitty job where he's like taking photos at like a department store. His best friend totally sucks. Like, he has no significant other. His life is Max, pretty much. His pride is Max. Like, that's all he cares about. And so when he hears this, it kind of crushes him. And if you look at the entire movie, the thing that like really hurts him is not that Max doesn't respect him or that he doesn't know Max. It's that Max won't tell him that he loves him anymore, and that they don't have this cute relationship like they used to. I think one of the reasons, like when I started this, I was like, why is this such a thing? Is because that's very much like an unsaid thing in drama that people kind of skirt around, that this movie just goes directly into. And I think Goofy's kind of part of it is almost why this movie's become so much more, because he doesn't do the fishing trip as some sort of tradition like all goofs do, all goof men must fish or some nonsense. He does it because he loved hanging out with his dad, and he loved his dad, and he loves his son. And it's not a creepy thing. It's like, just like he feels like a guy who doesn't have a lot going on. He really loves his son. He's trying to come up with a way to bond with him so he doesn't go down the wrong track, and he gives a lot of faith into him. And when that's betrayed, it's heartbreaking for him. The voice of Goofy, Bill Farmer, does a really good performance. Apparently they did consider giving Goofy not a Goofy voice because they thought it would not be clear enough for people, but I think Bill Farmer is able to do a really good performance in this because he's able to sell the idea of like this father who has kind of given up everything for his kid and knows his kid but wants to find things to do. Like, I actually don't think Goofy cares about what he's doing with Max. Like, he just wants to have a good time with Max. He wants to make sure Max is happy, and because he isn't aligned with him, that's really the issue, which is, I think, really interesting, because a lot of family things are more about like the father wants this tradition onto him, and it's more like Max shutting him out is the real drama, not him shutting Max out or not ever understanding Max. He sort of does, but he doesn't understand the adolescence part of it, which is very different from all the 90s things. Then you look at Max, and I think Max's part is even more heartbreaking. And I think the main part about that is you take two scenes from this movie, and I think a lot of people bring up like there's various connections to it and all that. Although I will say one thing, and I guess it's a spoiler, they get into the fucking Powerline concert, right? They do the whole dance with Powerline. They're all like excited, and then he doesn't wave to Roxanne at the concert. Like, if I was Goof, I'd be like, I cannot believe, like, we were pretty much could have gotten arrested, or like Powerline could have flipped out. It's an amazing moment, and he didn't wave to fucking Roxanne on the pay-per-view concert. Like, do you understand like how much shit we just went through? There's like a whole Goofy movie of events that you just like negated. Like, that is a specific plot point we set up, and you just Max, like, what the fuck? All you got to do is look in camera. They have red lights on the camera they're using. I don't have time to explain television production to you, but like seriously, just, oh my god, it fucking annoys me, because I rewatched that scene. I'm like, he must do that, and she just like, I mean, Roxanne was into it, but it's just like, come on, man, like, this is like, why did you set this thing up? Why didn't you cut that? I don't understand. Whatever. Anyway, so, but Max just waved to her, like, just wave at the camera. If he did it wrong, I would have been fine, but it's just, whatever. Max's thing is, you know, he's showing who he is through Powerline, through cool things, through giving Pauly Shore Cheese Whiz, which is the, I think, greatest "this is not weed but weed standard" I've seen. That was cute, and Pauly Shore sells it. I like that. Like, no, everyone was like, we get it, but let's just go into it. That was cool, because Pauly Shore, I mean, come on, he's definitely playing a stoner. Max's thing is basically 2 scenes, and it's sort of an unsaid thing that's going on throughout the entire movie. And it's that, like, he is becoming himself through Powerline, through the New Jack Swing thing, through, like, how he does things with AV, with his friends, and all that stuff. However, the main thing he is embarrassed about is becoming his dad. Because if you look at the opening thing, what he's afraid of is becoming Goofy, you know? And at the end, the reason he knows he can be accepted by Roxanne is he does the Goofy laugh, and she still loves him. It's kind of interesting, because when you think of your relationship with your parents, oftentimes you're more embarrassed by your parents than like any of your friends. Like, no one's friends ever goes like, man, your dad or mom is like super embarrassing. Like, nobody cares for the most part, but kids do. And I think he is embarrassed of being Goofy's son, which is heartbreaking when you think of like everything Goofy gives into that relationship. It's pretty heartbreaking, but that is the arc, essentially, because he, you know, even has, you know, during his like wet dream sequence, which turns into a nightmare, he becomes Goofy. And then, you know, I just think it's very stated like why he's so annoyed with his dad, because his dad represents sort of everything in his past. And when you're becoming like kind of that 12, 13, 14-year-old, you kind of want to reject all the kids' things and show that like you've always been super cool or something. And which is also, I think, what made this film kind of hard for people to get into in the 90s. But I think like Max, like he rejects Goofy because of that, and when he learns to accept his dad and accept like how cool his dad is, and getting the Powerline thing done, that's when he finds true acceptance in who he wants to be, and he can win Roxanne and everything like that. But I also think it ties into like why in the 90s this was underappreciated, because it's like you don't want to deal with like New Jack Swing, which is, if you're a teenager when this comes out, was the previous thing when you're a little kid and when you're into, you know, lamer stuff like Hammer or something like that, or as it's phrased then, because Biggie and all them, the first Jay-Z album, and not like 95, 96 was a great hip-hop R&B time, but all these very authentic people or presenting as, and Snoop Doggy Dogg and all that stuff, and then you look at New Jack Swing and it feels very produced and like Michael Jackson-y and all that stuff, and I think showing that made people sort of want to reject it, but sort of rejecting it for that reason was negating like how cool that thesis really was. So I liked watching a Goofy movie. I think it's actually a really great family film. I see all these breakdowns of like the story, the plot construction and all that stuff. I don't necessarily think it's like that radically amazing or anything. It did not represent as much to me. Like, I've seen this film twice, once in the 90s and once like before I saw it last night before I'm shooting this review. It's not going to represent as much as it does for you guys. That's fine. I did watch, I actually know I watched all of Goof Troop at the time because I played that out when it was in syndication. I really enjoyed that show. I haven't watched it since. It's sort of been forgotten in terms of the 90s stuff, but it was probably the best kind of 90s family drama. You know, if you look at things like Jingle All the Way or something, that's all about like using kind of capitalism to win your kids' approval through buying them something. And this was not necessarily, even though the ending was during a pay-per-view concert of a major pop star, so maybe I'm on thin ice here, but it's not really about that. It's really about him and Max coming together and having, you know, him understanding Max and Max not being ashamed of his dad, basically. I was a kid who liked I liked comic books when I was in elementary school and stuff, and I'd often like not want to talk about it with anyone because kids would like make fun of you and stuff. And I didn't become a weirdo who liked the Joker and the Snyderverse, which oddly I was thinking about the other day. I have like more right to do that than most people, but whatever, I don't, because I'm not a fucking insane stupid person. But I remember being like ashamed of that kind of stuff and not really wanting to talk about it with like cool people or whatever. And I think when you look at that kind of stuff, that's an essential part of growing up, and specifically in the 90s. It seems like that's not as in now, but I am also not a teen, and my kid's 4, so I like have no context for that anymore. So if you are a teenager, let me know. But I think for the most part, people aren't as negative about that stuff. You can like the same thing when you were like 8 and going on. People are more accepting. At the time they weren't, and we're kind of absolute assholes about it. I definitely remember like wearing what I thought was a cool Spider-Man shirt and was not treated as cool whatsoever. So, and I think you do get ashamed of who you used to be, and I think that's part of the acceptance of youth, is first off figuring out who you are, and also sort of coming to terms with like who you've been all along. And sometimes that doesn't usually happen in a summer, and it usually takes people till they're out of college almost or something, or even later in high school to really get. But I'm glad that this film like kind of talks about those things and like brings up those issues, and I thought it was like a really good story. I like the character Roxanne wasn't like this like unattainable beauty standard kind of girl. I know from the Tariq video, like the woman who designed her and like the genius of the design, I actually completely agree with that, because I was like thinking like most 90s things were like these unattainable female movie stars, and like that's just like not what real relationships are like, you know. Even though this film is like very fantastical in some cases in its animation, like they kept all the main relationships like very relatable, almost like something like Pixar would do later. Like Disney wasn't really all about this then. I know they buried it mostly because of Katzenberg, I think, greenlit it and said the script was good, and that really upset them, so whatever. But I do think it holds up better. You know, this was the period where Disney was really falling off, and this might be, Pocahontas came out in 95, and I think Toy Story sort of like took the greatest animation studio of the 90s mantle from Disney. With Pixar did that right with that one, and it's kind of like that passing the torch moment. But Goofy is kind of like a leftover like remnant of the past, and it's sort of, because it was a cheaper animated film, reminds me of things like Lilo and Stitch or Dumbo, where Disney Animation is pouring all of their money into other bigger productions and not noticing this lower budget animated film, and it takes off and becomes so much more than they ever expected. And much like those, I do think this is like at least a very tight, solid movie. Works very well, even gets in a lot of like making fun of Disney, probably more than like they were ever comfortable with, which also makes me think like there's a precursor to the whole Shrek thing, since Katzenberg was involved. I wonder how much he was like, let's just make fun of Disney. I'm like, weren't you fired yesterday? I'm like, just don't worry about it. Put that shit about the muskrat or whatever, the possum stuff in here with the possum world. Just let's just brainstorm this, and then I've got to leave and create Quibi because I have to reference that, I guess. I think this is a very goofy movie. It's a very good movie, and I was really surprised by this. It was like a gem I really haven't checked out, and I'm excited to watch this again, maybe with my family in years to come and so forth. And the Powerline song is really good. I don't give a shit at this point. I like New Jack Swing. It took me a while to, you know, when it had been long enough and you realize like who cares if you're cool or not, you're able to like New Jack Swing. For most of you, it was just like 90s music, but there are certain eras to those things. And you know, I think you come along to this movie, and as cool as you thought you were in 1995 or 1996, you suddenly realize you're not cool, and you're posting about Goofy on your Facebook page, and it's almost the kind of full circle of acceptance, an acceptance of self that this movie was kind of preaching the entire time. And as soon as you realize that you should kind of accept and sort of love your family, who you are, becoming a new person, and also not forget who you were before. And I think in a lot of ways that's what made this film such a successful family film, because it leaves you not feeling like you should really be ashamed for any of it. So if you've seen a Goofy movie and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching.